We are now recording.
Okay, so it's 5:33 and we're calling the meeting to order. And I will open it with roll call. And Kingston Cole, you're
Present.
I am present. Stephen, you're
Present.
present. Right. Lucy,
Present.
present. Rebecca,
I'm here.
you're here, of course. Pat,
Here.
we know you're here. Larry,
Here.
Larry's here. Max, we're waiting for, and Carolyn may be late. So with that, we will move on to item number 3. We do have a quorum, and that's any adjustments to the agenda. Would anyone at this time like to make a suggestion to the agenda? And seeing Larry having his hand raised, please, the floor.
Sorry, not agenda, minutes.
Oh,
That's the consent calendar. Yeah.
okay. So you want to respond to the minutes?
Yeah, so never mind.
Okay. Do we have a place to respond to the minutes?
Yeah, under consent.
Consent. That's of course. Okay. Sorry. So there's no other adjustments to the agenda on item number 3. Item number 4 is open time for public expression. And you said we have no public at this point?
At this time, we do not.
No. I think we're losing out to some.
Unless any of our panelists have a participant behind them.
Which has been known to happen. It has been known to happen. Okay. With we will close open time at this time. Item 5 is the executive officer's report, which will be a verbal report. And with that, Mark, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. I think many of you may have seen the predictive services presentation I gave to the board and the executive committee. Rather than present again to this group, I'm going to give the high level bullet points, and that is all the doom and gloom that we've been hearing from meteorologists, from fire professionals. The science is starting to support that, which obviously is not a good thing for us. We had 4 years of significant drought, maybe 5 years, then followed by a year of good moisture in 2019. And then 2020 was a below average year, and 2021 is be very, very dry. And if you look at the fuel moistures that we will use to track or predict large scale fires, a few months ago, we were just a hair below normal, not at critical values and not at historic lows, but it was below normal, but it was trending at the same angle, downward and drier. Well, with this April that was historically dry, that curve has steepened and is almost a vertical drop where we are getting close to historically low fuel moistures for this time of year. So that's those fuel moistures and the heavier fuels is what will drive a smaller fire and turn it into the large scale fires that we've been seeing. So it's not a good thing for us. The glass is half full is that there's not a tremendous grass crop out there because of the lack of rain. However, as I drive around Marin and Sonoma counties and elsewhere, I'm still seeing enough of a grass crop that's going to be able to carry fire into the heavy fuel. So I don't think we have that to hang our hats on. Predictive Services does not look forward to any measurable precipitation or significant precipitation between now and our typical dry period. What they don't know what's going to happen is monsoonal moisture. And monsoonal moisture coming up from the tropics is what creates the lightning, such as we had during August of 2020. So that is a really hard one for them to predict. And with the fuel conditions that we have, if we do have another lightning siege, we'll see something similar to 2020. Another thing they were wondering about was the fire footprints from 2020 and whether or not that will impact fires in California. And as large as 4 million acres is, that's not very much a California, and there's still a lot left to burn. So I really don't think it's going to have much of an impact, especially if you look at us specifically in Marin. Our 5,000 acres that we burned, we're all up against the coast. Everything else is available. So we need to be prepared. And then the thing that they have a hard time forecasting well out front is the offshore wind events that typically occur in September, October. They don't have much of a mechanism to be able to predict that far out in advance. So what does that mean for the MWPA? Should we change our course? And my recommendation is no. When MWPA was formed, we were already in a max effort, max sense of urgency mindset. And I don't see a way that we can increase that. But what I do recommend is tweaking our communications a bit to help inform the public that we do have heightened danger. They do need to be more careful when they're out in the wildland. And perhaps this can be a tool to help them get to comply when we're asking them to do defensible space evaluations and such around their homes. So that's kind of my wrap up on that. And if you guys want to ask some questions that are specific to predictive services, I'll take a pause here because I find it a little bit easier. Lucy?
So, what could the MWPA say there was a declared emergency for this county? Would that change how and how it could behave, what it could do?
The MWPA?
Yeah.
Depends on how the emergency is proclaimed, whether or not we could use exemptions in CEQA based on emergency declarations. There is that possibility, but we would definitely make sure that we are in complete alignment and that there's good solid foundation to that emergency proclamation or declaration. And I'm sure you guys all saw, hi Carolyn.
Hi,
Hope your drive wasn't
everybody.
too bad. And
Just got off the highway of 9 hours, but I got here.
and we do have Max here now.
I wish I knew what you were talking about, Mark.
It was, and if you want to connect offline, it was just the synopsis of the predictive services, Carolyn, and I can give it to you.
Okay.
Any other questions on that? And I'll continue if not, I'll continue with the rest of my executive report.
Any questions, anyone? I think we all realize we have a heightened.
Yeah. So board of directors meeting, again, I appreciate everybody's flexibility when we postponed it 1 week. By technical standards of the Brown Act, we met compliance for transparency as far as posting it in time. However, what the Brown Act says, if you have substantial evidence that you tried to meet the posting guidelines, which we had substantial evidence that it was posted and pulled down because of backing up of the website to a previous version that didn't include the posting. It's just not the level of transparency that we're looking for in the organization. So we thought it was a no-brainer to postpone. And it also allowed us to add a couple of agenda items that we felt were important. One of them is the 401 and the 457 for the employees. Myself and our new planning and program manager got to introduce our new planning and program manager, Ann Krelock, who is going to start on May 17th. I'm personally very excited about bringing her on board. She just has a ton of passion about this, and she has a proven track record of not only strong environmental background, but also simply getting projects done and being able to bring people together. So I really look forward to working with Ann in that capacity. We also were approved to bring on the 2 fellows from the Grizzly Corps, and they'll be working on 2 separate projects. One of the fellows will be working on helping with changing the culture of what we mean when we say defensible space or fire smart landscaping, and getting people to have a different mindset of what beautiful looks like around their homes. And then they will also be supporting our smaller agencies, specifically Muir Beach, Stinson Beach, Bolinas, and Inverness, since they really don't have any employee bandwidth to utilize the funds that are being provided to them by the MWPA. So that's one of the fellows will be working on that. The other fellow will be working on forecasting in the future. We see us starting to get into large scale landscape level projects, multi-thousand acre type projects, 3 to 4 years away from now. But we don't want to start that planning process 3 to 4 years from now. We want to start it now. We want to identify the stakeholders. We want to identify the challenges that we'll have, and we want to be able to create a path forward now, so that when we as an organization are ready, all of that groundwork has already been laid. We discussed the communications strategy quite extensively and received excellent input from the board and from members of the community. So I'm working with Pam Kuhn, Ross Goering, and the ad hoc subcommittee to put the recommended changes into the strategy. And then it'll be brought to the board as a consent item next board meeting. Getting ready for our executive meeting next week. Just a primer of some of the things that we'll be bringing to the board is the comment from Mimi Willard about the positive contact for applications received from low income. We'll be bringing a staff report regarding that, seeking guidance from the executive committee. We will be bringing a legislative support and agency policy guidelines, meaning what type of legislative endeavors or policy decisions that agencies are making can MWPA support, and not do it in a way that conflicts with perhaps one of our member agencies. And then a recommendation to not impose the inflation or the CPI adjustment that we can impose for next year's tax levy. And then for those that sat in on the advisory technical committee that was earlier this week, you saw that, or you probably heard that our process was not necessarily in complete alignment. We had all the agencies and the individual geographical areas working a little bit of in a silo, and things just weren't in sync, especially in describing what projects are. And so we presented just more of a thumbnail sketch of what we can look forward to. And we're refining the process, getting more descriptors in, and bringing everything into alignment, both in how they are presented and prepared, and also in alignment with the process within our 17 member agencies. And I believe Chiefs Tyler and Weber will give a detailed description at tomorrow's operations committee meeting on what this retooling is looking like. But two of the primary goals that we're looking at for this is to increase, even though we weren't able to share things at the meeting 2 days ago, we're doing this to increase the level of transparency we have in the products. It's just going to take a little bit longer for that transparency to come about. And also to make sure that the process of proposal to compliance for the projects that need compliance and moving into the project phase are all in sync with each individual agency and with the law. And with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Lucy, please. And then Rebecca. You're on mute, Lucy.
Going back to the Grizzly fellow who will be handling, helping out the small fire districts. I can't remember, there is some budget allocation for his or her position. And is that going to be reimbursed from the small fire districts for his or her time, or how does that work?
It'll be funded out of our core budget.
So even though that the time will be spent on helping the small district, I mean, understandably, but
right. It'll be, and remember, we have the 5 geographical areas, and we are supposed to stay within the 80% of the revenues gained within that 5 geographical area with a 5-year average. So we'll make sure that we credit the time to the appropriate geographical area.
Thank you.
Great.
So
Rebecca, and then Kingston. Rebecca, you had a question?
Yes.
I believe you were next, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, please.
Oh, so the projects that Ruben was listing at the meeting, were those local and D-space projects, or did they include core?
They included core.
So it was everything.
It was everything. We just we're trying to give a flavor of all of the projects, but actually the most of what he was discussing were core projects.
Okay, and then when the local and D-space projects were being listed, either by him or by the other couple of folks that spoke up. Was that in order to do some of that grouping of stuff to come up with a sharing of projects to make one big instead of multiple littles?
Well, the local mitigation project would stay separate, but the idea was to share that information so that they are moved forward in a consistent fashion, so that when the Southern Marin area works on a local mitigation project, it's done in the same way as Novato or San Rafael.
Oh, okay, so maybe not actually grouping to share, but grouping it to make it look sort of similar, or use the same process, or use the same tools, or, okay, great.
Right, right.
And then the approval process moving forward, is the approval process to get a core project shovel ready handled separately and or differently from approvals of DSpace and local?
The only difference will be that for the core projects, it will be MWPA's responsibility as the lead agency to take care of it. Whereas the local mitigation projects, it is the member agency that's the lead agency. Otherwise, the process should be the same.
And so if it's a MWPA project, approval, so be presented by the the ATC, presented to the ops committee. Ops committee will then present to the board,
Correct,
and the board approves.
correct.
And if it's a local project, that's all going to be through local, whatever their normal going through the local process
Through
is.
their councils and boards, correct. However, I will require the documentation on our side to see that all the steps have been followed. And when we create our project tracking portion of our website, both core and local mitigation projects and DSpace projects will be listed on that one site. So it's a one-stop shop for what MWPA is funding.
So you'll be able to see where all the money's going, even if it's going to local and DSpace.
That is the intent.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. And then I believe Kingston, you are up next, Stephen.
Okay,
And Max, did you have, I'm sorry, Max, did you have your hand up? I wasn't sure.
I did, but my question was already asked and answered, so.
Okay, wonderful. Kingston, please.
Yeah, Mark, have you communicated with Mimi about what you're doing about the senior exemption?
She and I've had several conversations. She's been great because rather than just bringing a concern to the table, she brings a concern with suggested courses of action, which I really appreciate. We've had a very open and honest dialogue, and I just literally drafted that staff report today. So I'm laying out the data for the executive committee to make a recommendation, whether or not to make an adjustment.
Yeah, and I had some other questions about the advisory technical committee. First of all, they use it seems like a term of art, shaded fuel breaks. And my sense of that is that it's going in and dealing with invasive species removal on a limited basis. And would you explain that?
That's a component of it. Shaded fuel breaks are essentially what we are asking the residents to do around their home. And that is create separation from the plants and not create a ladder. So if you look, if you're on a hike in Marin and you look out through that trail and you have head high brush that you can barely see through right underneath a ton of trees, what we really want to do is thin out that brush and keep the ground fuel separated, and then limb up the trees and remove the unhealthy trees. And then you're looking at a shaded fuel break.
Yeah, I listened to all the several members of the committee who were talking about doing shaded fuel breaks. And it is part of the next year's budget and process. But the one thing I didn't hear was anything about prescribed burns. I'm wondering, is that not an option, especially going into this super hot fire season?
It is an option, and I believe we have some that have been already proposed, on the smaller scale. Prescribed fire is definitely going to be one of our tools, but that's where I was talking about those landscape level projects. Those are the ones that are more removed from where people are living, and so for the first couple of years, we're really focusing where the humans are, and then we'll start moving into the landscape as a whole.
And that at that point, prescribed burns will become a bigger tool.
Yes,
used more
exactly.
frequently.
But we would like to start experimenting, not experimenting, but start having smaller ones so the public gets used to seeing smoke in the air. That's our smoke, that's good smoke. And it's not a big surprise when we start doing it on a larger scale.
Right, and Angel Island was yesterday, I believe, or the day
And-
before. Go ahead, I'm sorry, Mark.
And those were all, I believe those were all pile burns on Angel Island.
Stephen, and then Rebecca will come back, we'll come to you. Stephen, please.
Yeah, we had some pile burns here in Cascade Canyon a couple of weeks ago.
Oh.
And it was different. It wasn't the area burn that we've talked about with prescribed burns. But I wondered, one request I have is, instead of talking about landscaping as covering the open space or wildland or something like that, because we often talk about landscaping of the people we hire to clean up around our houses and take care of the plants on our own properties. If you could refer to open space or wildland or anything like that, because I was having trouble keeping track of which thing you were talking about.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. And that landscape level project, that term is a term of art in the industry. So we just get stuck saying it a lot. So I hear what you're saying.
All right. Well, we need to remember that the public doesn't speak that term, term of art. Following up on, I think, Rebecca's question a little bit, the ATC, does the ATC put together, approve of, or anything like that, a core project before it goes to the ops committee?
They don't approve, but they build, and then it goes to they get submitted to the operations for approval. And in a perfect world, each of the agencies and each of the geographical zones, in my opinion, in the perfect world, they're going to submit for more value in projects than we actually have available to fund. And that allows the operations committee to know where their threshold is and then prioritize those projects. And some projects will fall above the funding line, some projects will fall below the funding line. And the reason why I was then funding is that if maybe a project falls out because we were unable to get compliance on it or some other hurdle came about, then we can just move on to another project and have it ready to go.
Okay, so the ATC puts together the project to be presented to the ops committee if it is a core project.
Correct.
Okay, all right. And all of the separate projects go directly to the ops committee themselves.
Well, it's just the member agencies do it, but it's the same people who are building the projects for the member agencies are also the people who are on the ATC. So it's the same population of people.
Okay, but they do it individually.
Correct.
And it's the ops committee that has to set its priorities.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And if it doesn't get approved this year, they might see if they can aggregate it or tweak it or just put it in line again for the following year.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Great. And Stephen, make sure you take down your hand. Thank you. Rebecca, please. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. The projects that were being listed in the meeting this week from the people on the ATC, are those projects that are being considered for the budget year that's going to start July 1st?
Yes.
And so those will be approved by the board, the core projects, those will be approved by the board by June 30th?
Yes.
Okay.
It's going to be a lot of work, but had a nice long conversation with Jason Weber and Bill Tyler yesterday. And so we've mapped out how we're going to get there.
So nobody calls Jason, Bill, or you between now and then.
That would be nice, but probably not realistic.
So then the COC would be looking at this last year's stuff, budgets and work plans, starting July 1-ish.
After we,
Or
and
late-
we'll do our audit and produce the audit. In the meantime, you guys can start working on your review as well. But I think an anchor point, and Larry Chu might help me with this. I would think that the audit is a solid anchor point for you guys to work from as well.
So that discussion may be later tonight or some other, I think it'll come under future agenda items. Never
Okay.
mind.
Okay, very good. Pat, and then Stephen, and then Larry, and then Lucy, in that order.
So since this seems to have morphed into a conversation about the ATC meeting, and I didn't get to attend either one of them in person. The second one, I had it on the wrong time on my calendar, that I had it in the afternoon and it turned out to have been in the morning. But one thing that slightly concerned me, and this is kind of going over both of the two ATC meetings, in last year's form that they used, at least for the local projects, there was some attestation that this project was something new, that this was not something that was simply replacing previous local money. And I didn't see that anywhere, nor have I heard that. I did hear, and Mark, I want to thank you for repeatedly telling people that no, they can't pave roads with this funding. And I did hear people say, this should be new projects, not something that's simply replacing your local city's budget. But I didn't see that anywhere on the form. And I just wondered, did I miss it, or are we just trusting that this is true?
I will need to look into that. And actually, I like the attestation to stay in. So I'll follow up with the advisory technical committee on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Stephen, back to you, and you're on mute.
Thank you. If one of these core projects that you're trying to get approved and ready to go on July 1st requires a CEQA review or EIR, how's that going to happen since we've been told that these things often take a year?
Well, and it depends on the level of the project. And that's where I'm talking about our retooling our process to make sure it's in alignment with how we need to do it. So the funding would be allocated for the environmental review. And then once the environmental review is completed, then the funding for the project to actually be implemented would be approved.
Okay, great. Then Larry, please, floor is yours.
I was starting to respond to Mark's comments, but I think I'll save it for our agenda item where we talk about future agenda.
Okay, thank you, Larry. And Lucy, you had your hand up.
Well, maybe this should be postponed, but I was going to ask if anybody has an approximate idea of how long an audit might take. So it goes to the auditors, and 6 months, 3 months, 1 week. What is the sort of reasonable time frame? Obviously, things can be different, but do you have any idea?
Based on what Larry had said before, I'm estimating 3 months. Larry, let me know if I'm way off base on that.
No, I think given the number of transactions you have this year, it should, if Alyssa is able to, tee it up in advance for the auditors, you get on their calendar, you have whatever it is, list of things they need in advance. Then you close out the year, turn it over to them. Yeah, it's reasonable to get it done in 3 months for an agency of this size. It's not about dollars, it's about number of transactions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And now I'll ask my question. I've been waiting patiently. For Anne Krelock, will you put her biography or something on the website so people can see this, and maybe for the fellows as well?
I will, and that'll be part of our retooled website. We'll have biographies for all the employees.
Right, and this is now going back to where you were speaking, which is now about half an hour ago. And you mentioned that, yeah, you got to kind of rejigger the process a little bit and get things in sync. And I think that's, we really didn't comment on that, but I want to comment on to say that I think that's expected, that with a new agency that you'll move forward and then see something and have to just readjust. And even maybe this evening will cause some of that as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And if there's no more questions, we're on to the next item, which is the consent calendar. And Larry, you had a comment that you wanted to make, so the floor will be yours.
Yeah, it's just a really minor item, but it proves I read it. At the end, it says that we ended our meeting at 4:30 in the afternoon.
That would not be accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember. I think last time, I can't remember what time we ended, but
It was, I believe it was closer to 6:30. I think we were right at an hour.
yeah.
Yeah, we had a good short meeting.
went back.
Okay, and then we're on to item number 7 now, which are,
Well, we would need-
Ed, go ahead, I'm sorry.
We would need to move and to approve the.
Move to approve. Do I hear a move to approve?
I'll move.
Max will take you as the second because Kingston had his hand up first. And so
Perfect.
we move forward. All right. Committee reports. We will now go to monitoring assignment reports. And does anyone want to make any further comments on any of the committees? We really did cover a lot.
Well, are we talking about committee reports now?
We are committee reports. Yeah, that's where you were at one of the subcommittee meetings and you want to.
Yeah, I would like to report on where we are on our work with the ESP partnership.
No, that's the Kingston. That's the, I was afraid that will be coming up on the next item.
That's fine. I don't mind.
Yeah, these are MWPA committee reports, subcommittee reports, or committee reports. Rebecca, please.
So I'll just add to the Mark's report out on the ATC. I think it is good to be reporting out the way we did this time to get, Mark, as you pointed out, early vetting and transparency. And I do think it was good to have had it in a synopsized version and quickly gone through. That was the fastest committee meeting I've been in, I think, less than 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
And I do think letting the community see stuff early-ish in the process, it would have been good if, and I know that we sort of leaped in without a lot of preamble. I think just handing it off to Ruben, some stuff got glossed over, but I do think it would be good to do the preamble that you did later on, right at the beginning, to say, here's what we're thinking of doing right now. Here's why we're doing it. Here's how it's going to go. Here's who's speaking, and here's what's not going to be done, like listing of every project that we're going to work on wasn't.
That was the plan, and then Ruben got excited and kept on going.
Yeah, I kind of figured that because it got confusing, and as you've heard, there were a lot of questions about what was going on, which probably would have all been answered had you been able to do the preamble. I do think it was interesting, David Long leaping in on Fern. Do you have any feel for how much feedback we're going to be getting from ESP and Fern about projects, is that going to have an impact on timing of when all this is going to happen? How are they going to be leaping in and
we are like finalizing that process and how to do it. And David had some valid points that in order to approve it as a project and the definition of a project in CEQA, the project proposal form doesn't have all the information we need to have on it. So it's going to be more that we will approve the concept and the priorities and the areas of concern. And then we will go through the compliance process and that's when it gets approved as a project. And if we do the process right, then the feedback will be included during that environmental review process. And then once it passes compliance, then we'll be able to go straight into the project. Does that help?
sort of? So does that mean that there will be, the MWPA will have said, yes, we're budgeting money for that before CEQA approval is actually done? So it'll have budget assigned to it, and then it gets CEQA approved, and then it gets done.
Correct.
Okay. And then actually, I don't think anything else of substance came up. It was, I thought, not bad as a whole process to go through. It just was rough and I think that was because it was first.
And we're learning, and the level of detail that I had hoped to be able to share by now wasn't there. Like when you said soon-ish, I agree, it's soon-ish. I wish we were a month ahead of where we are at, but we're still learning.
Okay. I won't report out on every single thing because I think you reported out on the big stuff. So unless anybody has any questions about what went on.
Pat, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a word mostly in praise from watching the executive committee meeting. That what made me especially happy was the knowledge that no tax money will be spent for lobbying. While I know that there are a lot of things that MWPA is going to be in favor of, I think it's great to know that there's no tax money is actually going to be spent on that. And I'd also just like to briefly, because I think it kind of got lost in the shuffle in the whole conversation about the COC bylaws, that the reality was that everybody sitting in that meeting except one person was comfortable with them, the bylaws as they were. And it was just that one individual who was wanting more clarity and perhaps not realizing that some things were definitely or deliberately left slightly vague. But that I think it's important for us to know that Bruce, Julie, Mark, trying to remember who all, Sashi, Dennis, were all thought that the bylaws were fine as written.
Okay, thank you, Pat. And I'll just repeat a comment that I made to the board of directors, which really it's connected, but not directly to what we're doing. And that's what's going on right now at MMWD and the 10-year process that MMWD is going through. And it's a very involved planning process. They've done a workshop in December that was 1A, a workshop in January that was 1B, a workshop in March that was workshop 2. They have 3 and 4 coming up, and then they'll bring something forward to the public. And they're looking at 4 options, from doing nothing, status quo, well, not doing nothing, status quo, 4% a year, to a level A, which would replace 100 miles. One of the things it would do is replace 100 miles of 300 miles of very old, brittle cast iron pipe, that pipeline that we still have. Also, we have other problems like the Pine Mountain tunnel, should we have an earthquake, there's a real question whether it can stand up. If today's standards, there would be no way we would be storing water in that tunnel. Just no way. That tunnel goes back over 100 years. We have tanks that haven't been treated in decades. And that means painting on the outside and treatment on the inside. We have very old pumps. We have more pumps, more tanks, and than 5 similar Bay Area water departments combined. Plus, we have a watershed to manage. And if you look at East Bay Mud and you look at some of the numerous other areas, they don't have watersheds. They're getting their water through a larger system. So I wanted to make the board aware that this directly affects every town and city as to how we go forward. And of course, the watershed and managing that, how we go forward in these coming years. And we're paying about 1 penny a year, right? 1 penny a gallon right now. And it's too little. We have not been putting away money really from the 80s to take care of our infrastructure. So now we've got about $800 million in deferred maintenance, and we're barely going to pay even for a fraction of that. So we've got real problems. I did send to the, through Mark, thank you, the 3 PDF presentations that have been done, and any of you I can send them, or Mark can send them to you, and you can get a real quick overview of both the issues and where this has to go. And again, like I did with the board, I just encourage you at this point, this is a 10-year planning process. And with what we're dealing with climate change and everything we're dealing with, it's really important for the community to start to be involved in this process instead of reacting to it when they come out with the plan. And with that, please, Rebecca.
And plan D is you can all move to Nevada, where we have NMWD.
And yes, that's right. Right. And Carolyn, you're in a different watershed, I believe, too, as well.
Indeed, right.
That's right. That's right.
Thank goodness for the fog.
Yes. Yes, sir. Please. Your hand is up.
Yes. Rebecca, don't get too smug. Your water comes from the Russian River, and they just declared a drought today. So
Yeah, I heard that part.
Yeah.
I don't know which is worse. Nicasia looked very low.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's awful.
Scary.
Terrible.
I saw on some news program pictures of Lake Sonoma, and it's shocking how low it is compared to where it normally is. So I don't think Sonoma is going to have Russian River water to share with us,
Yeah.
because their main water source is almost used up already.
So Carolyn, we're all moving in with you.
Well, yeah, not so fast. And we just have our mountain watershed, and I think our backup plan might be also to use North Marin. I think that's been done in the past, but I really, I've been out of town. I don't know what the latest thinking is.
Right. Right. Mark, you were going to say
I
something?
was just going to say, do we have any other monitoring assignment reports to discuss?
Thank you, sir.
Oh, business.
We'll keep moving on.
We have our presenter waiting in queue to give us our Brown Act training.
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, Kingston, we're on, I'm sorry, Stephen, did you have your hand up, please? I don't want to. No, okay. Kingston, now we're on to item B, 7B, which is ESP Environmental Group's Ad Hoc Subcommittee Report. Please, sir.
Yeah, was very brief. On April 1st, I received an email from Belcoal saying we will respond. We will respond as soon as possible, probably by the end of April. So I haven't received anything. So we'll let you know what happens next month.
Right. Stephen, please.
yeah, this is a request to Mark about that. Could you make sure that we know when the Finance Committee and the Executive Committee meetings are taking place? I don't think they're on the website.
So finance is, well, let me go. Executive committee is every first Thursday at 10. So we will have a meeting on May 6th. And then we've just locked in a date for the finance committee. It will be May 14th at 10.
Thank you. Okay, then we are on to item C, Policy and Procedures Ad Hoc Subcommittee Report. And I'll just open that since I was on the subcommittee and just say, you know, it was a very thoughtful, deliberative process. I appreciate all the time everyone put into it, and each one of the four of us did add something to it. And we tried to keep it both tight yet as complete as possible. And I think, as Pat said, you know, we left a little wiggle room in there so that we realize that if issues really come up, and this is not us, this is like future committees. All of us could be elsewhere by that point. But if you have a real troubled person, we're each individual citizens. We each have the opportunity to say something there, so that we should never get into a place where you have one or two people really dominating and making it difficult for others. Plus, I think we all realize what we're really working on here is really serious stuff, and that the people that are going to be on this committee in the future are going to, in all likelihood, be serious-minded about this as well. So with that, would any of the subcommittee members like to make any comments before we move it to the board for comment? And seeing none, I'll open it to the board. Is there any comments from the board on the rule, on what has been presented? Kingston, please.
Well, I had a problem with number 8, which reads, it's about all members will be speaking in a personal capacity unless previously authorized by the, by the full board, by the full COC. The next sentence bothered me because it seemed like it's incomplete. You know, I'll say why in a second. It says the member may state that he or she is a member of the COC, but that he or she is speaking personally. We all have different hats that, you know, we bring that we're working on, and right, Larry, you just demonstrated right now, talking on behalf really of MWP of the MMWD. In several meetings I've been listening to, members of our committee, all right, have made comments. You know, and most of the time they're real clear. I know Carolyn is always, if she speaks for Fern, she's very specific about saying I'm speaking for Fern, and I'm not speaking as a COC member. I think it's important that we have clarity with the board members. I think it's a courtesy to tell them, all right, that we are not speaking as members explicitly. All right, it's really a disclaimer. We are not speaking as members of the COC. All right, we are speaking as on a personal level, well, of course, and or else we're speaking on behalf of a group. And I think it should be. I'm just saying there should be a requirement that you disclaim if you're going to speak about something that's from another special interest group, right? That you should immediately, the first thing you should do is say, I'm not speaking for the COC. To be real clear in any meeting, anytime. And that's why I think it should be changed. So it's not may speak, but it shall speak. All right, that's for one thing. And also include something about, or for another organization at the back end of that sentence.
Kingston, I think you make a good point on speaking personally, and what you said is that you're not speaking on behalf of, but I would think that it's not really necessary to say you're not speaking on behalf of the COC every time we get up in front of there, because I think unless you're explicitly saying so, members of the public and members of the committee would just accept it as you are speaking for yourself. Because we will, if we are speaking on behalf of the COC, say we're speaking on behalf of the COC. At least that's been my experience over the last 20, 30 years. You know, if I'm speaking on behalf of someone, I'm explicit. If I'm not, I just start speaking.
I would rather you be specific, you know, about, I would go the other way around. I mean, I think it's really important because several times members of our committee have said things that related to policy or even our bylaws in these meetings. And I really think that there has to be clarity there that they're not speaking on behalf of the COC. They're speaking as on a personal level or they're speaking on behalf of an organization. Right.
Mhm. Right, right. That of course, if you're speaking on behalf of an organization. I think it, Larry, you and then Pat, I believe.
Yeah, I was going to point out the same thing, and I brought up the example before. Is I can even say that I'm speaking personally, but people will still associate my comments to my associations.
An inference.
So it is still better to change that if there's to a shall. I would favor that as well. Uh, I had three questions I wanted to raise. One of them had to do with the way the first set of principles are laid out. And if you look at number 2 with act with integrity and an ethical manner, are we assuming that anything that is unethical or without integrity will just be caught up in this net? Because typically you probably should have at least a conflict of interest clause, as well as strict adherence to the Brown Act when communicating. So those are 2 items. And then I was going to comment on the 8th one there. It says criticize only ideas, not people. It's not that I disagree with that. It's not always a criticism. So there may be a minor subtlety if I suggest, challenge the issue, not the person. But, that's just a rewording or wordsmithing. But I would like to see what the committee's general thought is on including a clause about conflict of interest and strict adherence to the Brown Act when it comes to communication. And, maybe we can take that up after you get the Brown Act orientation after this.
Right, thank you, Larry. That is actually very helpful. That's why we're bringing it to the board, of course, to see what we're missing or should change. Pat, please.
Yeah, this is just going back to the Kingston's comments on number 8, that I can see 2 different circumstances when one might speak at a meeting, and one is when you are obviously speaking on behalf of another organization. I wrote Mark an email earlier that I said I'm wearing my Master Gardener and my DSpace Inspector hat, so that it was clear what, where I was coming from in the comments I was making. But then there are times when you are there and asking questions in your role on the COC, but you're at the same time not speaking for the COC because it hasn't been, whatever you're saying hasn't been approved by the whole membership. And I'm not quite sure how to have that distinction in there, but I think we at least ought to be aware of when we're speaking for a different organization and when we are asking a question or asking for clarification in our role with the COC.
Thank you, Pat. Max, please.
Yeah, I was a member of the subcommittee and just wanted to thank Kingston and Larry and Pat for the suggestions. I agree with all of them. I think maybe cleaning up some of the language around, making explicit in at least some circumstances, as Pat said. I think that was a good way of looking at it, right? Is that there's some instances where it's very clear you're representing a different hat, and then there's others where there might be confusion. And then I thought, Larry, your suggestions regarding conflict of interest and adherence to the Brown Act were great additions. In terms of the, concentrating on issues versus people, I was the one who had suggested that. And I'm happy with Larry's new wording or wordsmithing. So just wanted to show support for that.
Okay, very good. Larry, please.
Sorry, I had one more question. I'll leave it for Mark to answer. Mark, do you feel that there is any need to have any statement about the interaction between the committee members and staff?
It's a good question. I don't, my gut says no. I mean, um, granted, I'm the only staff member now. We're about to double our staff, which is great news. But no, I feel comfortable without that, to be honest with you.
Okay, I guess if we can always change it if you get to the point where you feel that people are not respecting the boundaries and going to staff on things, or you know, not having you as the first point of contact, then
Yeah.
you know, we might have to put that in if there's some misbehavior, not necessarily from this group, but as we said, you know, possibly for future you know, boards.
I appreciate the thought, and like I said, I think the relationship we're developing, I'm comfortable as is, but it could always be adjusted if it strays. And I did want to mention that as you guys all can see, I started doing a screen share on my side because Lucy found some grammatical stuff that needed to be changed. So this is version 3 was published with the package. This is version 4 with minor grammatical edits that Lucy had provided over the last few hours today, and I think before that. And then you can see her going in and starting to update some of the suggestions that have been made now. And I think that'll make it easier for us if we get to the point of passing the motion tonight to say as displayed, and then we'll make sure that this is what's approved.
So,
And Lucy, would you like to just comment on the top and then item number 5, which are really the major places that you outlined as making the change, and just let
sure.
everyone know? Yeah, please.
So just the item at the top is because this is a sort of self-contained document, as you know, the legal thinking is always it should have its own definition. So when we talk about the MWPA or the COC, it's simply the way documents should have their own definition. So I added in, you know, the definitions, the COC or the committee, or you give the full name of the Marine Wildfire Prevention Authority, and then you make it MWPA. So that was the main change up there. I added a parallelism to report on these matters, and then the way we had item 5 was I think it was. Let me just have a quick look at the previous version. I think it said, recognize that our objective is to assist and support the MWPA accomplish its mission. And you don't support the MWPA accomplish its mission. So I was simply changed it to the objective is to assist and support the MWPA as it functions to accomplish its mission. So that's the change there. It's a little more cumbersome, but it's I felt it was more grammatically correct.
And adding in the COCs instead of our.
Yes, sorry, yes, I changed that. And just so while we're on this section, as you can see, I added Larry Chu's suggestion for item 8, which is challenge the issues, not the person.
Right.
Can we go back to this item 2 here and see if we can get some wording in there about what was it proposed? Something brown. What was the language that Larry?
Conflict of interest.
So avoid conflict of interest. We have a verb that begins each sentence. So avoid conflict of interest and breaches of the Brown Act, or avoid. Larry, did you have an actual sentence in mind?
Not for that part. Actually,
Okay, so
I have, it's more like 2, maybe 3 sentences for each of the things underneath it.
Oh.
So you know, I'll shoot that back to Mark to distribute to the committee for them to review it. Because I think part of it,
yeah,
I'll just bring it up. I'm not going to read anything, but you know, the question, for example, is is it, we already know that there's a financial conflict of interest that you have to adhere to. But what if there's a perception of a conflict of interest? Should you recuse yourself?
Any perceived?
Good point.
You know, so if you were to word it, you would say, you know, a committee member shall recuse themselves even if for an actual or perceived conflict of interest.
Okay, so that would go down into the procedures.
Yes, yeah, rather
Um,
than up under the
Okay, so
values
let's
or principles.
so let's make it a new item number 9. Oh, a new item number 10, and say it again if you would.
Oh, a committee member shall recuse themselves for an actual or perceived conflict of interest.
Recuse him or herself.
But that's a tough word to perceived. Boy.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm leaving it up
for an actual
discussion.
or perceived, for an actual
Potential conflict.
See, the Fair Political Practices Commission only defines conflict of interest with financial related matters.
For an actual for an actual conflict of interest or or a situation in which, well, that's getting so complicated. For an actual or perceived conflict of interest, is that good enough for an actual or perceived?
That's how I would word it, but you know, I'll leave it open for discussion.
I think you can understand what it means.
I have problems with it. Perceived by whom?
Before we go too far, folks, before we go too far into this, Mark, how much time do we need for the Brown Act training?
We budgeted about 1 hour.
1 hour. Okay, so may I make a suggestion that we hold our questions and that we respond to the subcommittee or respond to Mark, and Mark can come to the subcommittee? Mark, what would be the appropriate way to handle this?
I think that, just as you stated, if members of the committee have suggestions, that they can either draft them on the separate notes or make comments in the PDF and send it my way, and I could forward it to the ad hoc subcommittee.
Okay.
Carolyn, will that be okay? Because you had your hand up. Pat put hers.
Oh, no, I took it down. It's fine.
Okay, your hand is still up though, however. Thank you.
Right, well, yeah, okay.
So then we'll hold approval
I took
on,
care of it, Carolyn.
Oh, okay, good.
approval on this until next month.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what we'll do is we'll put this on hold. Lucy, I think what you can do is because most of the document is completed, is you'll get the feedback if you don't mind, and you can plug it in, pass it to us. If we feel a need for a meeting, we can call a meeting. Otherwise, we can just say that we're okay with the document. We can bring it back at the next month. Does that sound okay? Lucy, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
I was sort of hoping that we could get the this finalized. I mean, if everybody is comfortable with the concepts, particularly say the new one that's been added, if we can approve it. I just feel that I'd like us to have done this, and it's, you know, we're now many months into our process and we're still doing our housekeeping. So if nobody agrees, that, you know, fine. But if there's some way we could approve this and then unless there's something that there's, you know, a very large concern about, which we can always revisit at another meeting and propose an amendment or a change. Do you think we could move forward with this? And Mark, I guess this is a question for both you and Larry.
And Carolyn, you have your hand up.
Yes, I mean, I would prefer that we move on to the training. You know, I've been away. I really haven't had a chance to look at this code at all. So that would work for me, that let's just put it off and finish it later. I don't see any rush, and I think it's important that we end our meetings on time. So That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Carolyn. Larry, please.
Yeah, I guess because the agenda says also to approve, I'll move to continue this to our next meeting.
I'll second Larry's.
We'll take a vote. Raise your hand if you move to approve for the next meeting. So, sorry, Lucy, I would like to as well. I really would. I really would. Okay, so we have, it looks like Lucy and Rebecca, no. And I believe the rest of the committee was a yes. Pat, were you a yes on
Yes.
continuing?
Here we go. There's my hand.
No, that's what I said. Was it?
Okay.
Okay, so with that, we shall move on to item number 8. It's information item, and it's the Brown Act training. And too bad we don't have members of the public here because this is so exciting. I know they will.
Just a clarifying question, Larry, if I may.
Yes, of course.
My understanding was we operated under Rosenberg's rules, not Roberts. Is that incorrect?
Rosenberg's, yes.
Okay.
That's
We've been
correct.
Roberts. Yeah.
Yeah. Did we follow Robert's rule we shouldn't have followed just now? I'm sorry, Max. I might have missed it.
Okay. Cool.
Mark, please introduce Emily and we will continue on. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we have the pleasure of having Emily Longfellow with us from Epstein and Holtzapfel, one of Megan's partners, and she has put together a Brown Act training for us. And with no further ado, Emily, thank you for being here tonight.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for having me. As Mark just said, I work with Megan Acevedo at Epstein and Holtzapfel Law Firm, representing public entities. I'm the City Attorney of Belvidere, the Assistant Town Attorney with San Anselmo, and also represent outside counsel work with various jurisdictions around Marin and the Bay Area, and community service districts. Graduated from UC Davis Law way back, I think 21 years ago at this point. I am a 15-year resident of San Anselmo. I've got 2 kids at Drake or 1327. I can't believe that either. And as someone who lives about a half mile from my favorite happy place trail, which is 680 up to Loma Alta, I appreciate the work that you do, and get up there as much as I can running, and really appreciate your work and understand how critically important it is. So without further ado, and I will try not to take an hour. I don't think this will take the full time. Let me see if I can share my screen. Let's see. Hopefully, did that work?
Yes.
All right, I never know about this one. All right. So let's see, I can't send it to myself, so I will shut that. The presentation tonight is to provide a summary of the Brown Act, which, as you know, is California's open meeting law. The particular issues, as you can imagine, and I know some of you are experienced in the Brown Act, can be very fact specific. So when in doubt, please contact us at any time. The Brown Act was enacted back in 1953, and the legislature's intent was to ensure that the public's business would be conducted in the open. It's a sunshine law. Both policy and the case law and the California Constitution indicate that it should be interpreted broadly to allow public participation and transparency. And in a nutshell, these are the basic requirements and goals of the Brown Act: that all meetings should be open to the public. The public has a right to comment on items on the agenda, and also during open public session about items that are not on the agenda unless it's a special meeting. And no discussion or deliberation or action may occur among a majority of that legislative body outside of that public meeting unless certain exceptions apply, which we will go through. This act applies broadly to elected and appointed bodies and to all types of communication. So as we know, we'll get into that later, we communicate in many different ways nowadays by text and social media and telephone. So the Brown Act applies to all legislative bodies, and this is, again, defined broadly: the governing board itself, the appointed bodies that are created by formal action of that board, and even if they're temporary and only have advisory authority, as long as they're created by formal action of the board, and standing committees, which are defined as having continuing subject matter jurisdiction over a particular issue, or they have a fixed meeting schedule. So there's certain things that are not a legislative body that won't be covered by the Brown Act. So something that frequently comes up is a temporary ad hoc committee. That's the common name for it, an ad hoc committee. And this is a committee that's made up only or solely of less than a quorum of the governing body, the parent body. And it's limited to a single subject matter to consider. And it's temporary. It's limited duration, and it will be dissolved once its task is complete. Because an ad hoc committee may only include members of less than a quorum of that legislative body, members of public or members of other committees aren't allowed to be permanently, or may not permanently go to these meetings on an ongoing basis, because again, it has to be solely members of that parent legislative body. Again, another exception here is that ad hoc committee members may meet with members of the public and other staff members, for example, to gather information so long as that contact is not outgoing. The important exception here, I just think I went through it, is that if less than a quorum of one legislative body meets with less than a quorum of another, and they act as a single committee, like a unitary body, they will be found to be subject of the Brown Act. So this one, the Sebastopol case a while back, I think one member of a city council and one member of a planning commission got together in order to act and make a recommendation to the council. So because those two members were members of different governing bodies and they acted together as a unitary committee to make a recommendation, that was found to be a Brown Act committee. Another exception here is groups advisory to a single decision maker. So, for example, a committee member is more than welcome to establish a group of advisory friends or 5 people or a certain amount of people to advise her on issues that will come before her. And this isn't a legislative body because these folks are only advising one committee member and they weren't appointed at the direction of the full legislative body. So that does not count. So here's a quiz. That's a picture of my favorite trail. A single member of a committee informally establishes an advisory committee to provide him advice on issues as they arise. Does the Brown Act apply? I think I just answered this one. No, because the committee hasn't been established formally by the legislative body, and this is only advising one particular committee member. So the second hypo is a temporary ad hoc committee invites a member of another committee to talk about recommendations for how to address fire-safe landscaping education, which will then be recommended to the full board. So does the Brown Act apply? Is this a legislative body? So here the answer would be yes. So even though there is a baseline ad hoc committee, what happens is that they added someone else from outside and they're acting as a unitary body to provide a recommendation to the full board. And this is the same situation if a member of the public is invited to join an ad hoc committee. So now that we have gone through the threshold issue about what constitutes a legislative body, the next issue is what constitutes a covered meeting. So a meeting is statutorily any gathering of a majority of members at the same time and at the same location, and this, of course, as we all know, can be virtual, to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of that body. So, for example, obviously regular and special meetings of the COC. This also, interestingly, includes when a majority of that legislative body meets in outside settings. So, for example, there's a case where the California Attorney General issued an opinion that a city council collectively touring their local water facility turned out to be a meeting that was required to satisfy the Brown Act. And I have also given similar advice to gatherings of the majority of the legislative body if they would like to, for example, go on a boat to tour something that was a matter of their subject matter jurisdiction. So there's some exceptions to what is not considered a meeting and that's appropriate to have. These are in the Brown Act statutory law. The first one is individual contacts. So an individual conversations between an official and any other person is permitted so long as it doesn't result in a serial meeting, which we'll cover in a second. A serial meeting is basically a series of communication among the majority that acts as a meeting. So for example, an official may talk with the public and other members as long as the views of the other officials aren't discussed. This is the same where a staff member may meet individually with each official as long as those views of the other officials aren't given. So this allows public officials, of course, to talk individually with constituents and reporters and advocates and staff. The second one is conferences. So a majority of the body may attend a conference or a seminar that involves discussion of interest to the agency, to the body, so long as, of course, they take care not to discuss among themselves matters within their jurisdiction, and these conferences must be open to the public. The third exception is the community or public meeting, and this exception allows a majority to attend an open and publicized meeting that's organized to address a topic of local community concern, so long again as those members don't discuss matters that are in their jurisdiction. So like the conference exception, this community meeting must be open and publicized. So for example, a majority of a city council may attend a meeting that's open and publicized for a local environmental action coalition, so long as they take care not to discuss city issues. I do note that the League of California Cities, who has a great Brown Act publication that I think you have the link to, but it's a great resource, particularly warns about this one because there's a fine line, this I'm quoting from their publication, between in these situations and what can be discussed, just to make sure that you're not discussing things that are in your subject matter jurisdiction. So another exception is you are welcome to attend meetings of other legislative bodies, again, if these are open and noticed, and so long as no discussion occurs among yourselves about that subject matter jurisdiction that you have. And same with standing committees. So members of the legislative body who are not members of that standing committee may attend as observers only. So this means that they shouldn't speak or participate. So an example of this is that a planning commission establishes a standing committee, for example, and this is below essentially the planning commission, so that a member who's not on that committee can attend, so long as they attend as an observer only. And finally, social ceremonial events are fine, and grand jury testimony is fine. And there we go. Here's this hypos here. Let's say 5 members of the Citizens Oversight Committee happen to meet in line for ice cream at the Scoop in Fairfax, which is my favorite, and they begin to discuss new California state fire-resistant structure regulations. Is this a Brown Act violation? So in this case, so far, no, because the state's regulation and what the state is saying in general is not within the subject matter of the COC here. However, this is a slippery situation, and care needs to be taken to make sure that this doesn't turn into a Brown Act meeting. For example, if discussion moves into how the MWPA may fund this education or outreach based on the new state regulations. Another example is that 3 members of a 5-member board attend a private community meeting of a local environmental group, but they don't discuss items within the board's subject matter jurisdiction. Is this okay? So in this case, the difficulty is that it says it's a private community meeting of a local environmental group. The community meeting exception allows for a majority of members to attend a meeting of a community organization so long as it's open and publicized. And again, they must avoid talking about matters within their subject matter jurisdiction. Couldn't stop taking pictures of my favorite trail again. So serial meetings are prohibited. I mentioned those before. Even though the definition under the Brown Act focuses on covered meetings and implies a physical focus, it applies equally to the series of communications among a majority of members that in effect operates like a meeting. So again, the Brown Act prohibits a majority of the members from directly or indicating using that series of communication to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item within business of their legislative body. And this happens when at any one time discussion can only involve a portion of the legislative body, but eventually it gathers steam and applies to everyone or a majority. So a serial meeting is that series of communication which involves less than a quorum of the members, but taken together, it does reach a majority, more a quorum. So serial, let's see, so mentioned above, the Brown Act does not apply to a series of substantive staff briefings. So for example, a staff member is free, and obviously this needs to happen, to give each member individual, or a less than a quorum of members, individual substantive information about a topic. That is not a violation. To prevent an inadvertent violation, these briefings should be factual and one-directional. So for example, the staff member would be doing the education or the talking about a certain matter, and the public official should be careful not to offer comments and don't inquire about the viewpoints of others. So there's two main types of serial meetings. The first one, they're hub and spoke, and the daisy chain is how they're labeled. For the hub and spoke meeting, the hub can be anyone. So a friend, a reporter, another committee member, a staff member, although staff's trained to avoid that. So for example, a reporter from the Marin IJ calls a committee member to get her views on spending for a certain project, and then inadvertently informs that member of the viewpoints of at least 4 other members. So in this case, the reporter has acted as that hub and has inadvertently facilitated that Brown Act violation. And again, inadvertently, that official who heard that information, inadvertently participated in something that shouldn't have happened, a serial communication here. So the easiest way to prevent this, and this doesn't feel natural sometimes, is when you start a conversation with someone, a reporter, a constituent, or another official that you serve with, to start the conversation that you don't wish to hear the viewpoints of other members on this body, and especially with members of the public or reporters, seek assurances that they won't share your positions to members of the body. So the daisy chain is another type of serial meeting which occurs when there is a series of communication among a quorum of that legislative body. So for example, you've got a 5-member agency. Board member A calls board member B, who then texts C about an issue, saying, for example, I've talked to, Joe and Jenny, and they'll recommend this project. Will you? So at that point, you have a discussion or collective concurrence among a majority of those members. And again, I do want to emphasize, as I stated before, that it's fine and completely appropriate for an official to have separate conversations with staff, or with fellow members that you serve with, to engage in these separate conversations factually, as long as you really take care not to communicate your views on the subject or the positions of other members. So, use of technology to meet. So we're all doing this lately for the past over a year. Meetings can occur via any technology at this point: email, text, social media, Zoom, other technology, telephone. Any time that you use either technology to have a series of prohibited meetings that can occur by use of this technology. So this is just some practice tips that, remember, reply alls to an email can inadvertently lead to communication among a majority of the members. The same with texts. Interestingly, and I haven't had this happen, but this clearly applies during a meeting. So, for example, it wouldn't be appropriate to text your fellow members during a meeting. This is easier, well, it can happen live or on Zoom, to reach a collective consensus with the majority about something that's happening on the other screen. So the practice tip for this is avoid group text with the majority of the legislative body. Use caution when using that reply all email. So recent state law imposes additional restrictions and clarifications regarding the use of social media. This is developing, and we did receive some clarification on this recently, which is good. So an official, of course, may communicate via a social media platform for the purpose of answering factual questions, providing information to the public, or soliciting information to the public regarding a matter that's in their agency's jurisdiction. However, officials may not use these platforms, of course, to discuss among themselves anything that's in their jurisdiction. And this, in the new law, is defined quite broadly. So discussing an item can consist of posting an emoji. So for example, posting an emoji among a majority of members to a certain comment, like a smiley face or a thumbs up or a frowny face or anything like that. Anything that expresses reactions to that communication made by members of the legislative body would be prohibited. And something that is more stringent, that this is kind of a change. An official may not directly respond to any social media post by another member that's made or posted or shared by another member. So for example, one committee member should not post a comment in response to another member's post. And this is true even though here there's only 2 people involved. So this doesn't involve a majority of that legislative body. So basically use caution when you're using social media and keep these things in mind. So speaking of using caution, I wanted to take a brief detour for a note on the Public Records Act, which is kind of Brown Act adjacent. The Public Records Act broadly provides that the public has access to any public record, and this is defined in the statute broadly as any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business, prepared, owned, used, or retained by the agency regardless of that physical form that it's in. So this can include texts, clearly, emails, certainly paper writings. The record must relate in some substantive way to agency business, so things like purely personal matters aren't covered. And this policy is similar to the Brown Act to ensure transparency in governmental actions. Let's see. So basically the practice tip on this is to assume, and this kind of feels unnatural too, is to assume that anything that you write, whether that's on your personal device, from your personal account, that anything if it has to do with your agency business, that could be made public. And that's true even if you label it confidential. The process, how this happens is that the agency receives a Public Records Act request. You'll be contacted to do a search of your records, and we will take a look at those to see if there's any exceptions. Of course, the exceptions apply, such as it has to do with the agency's business. Number one, it's going to be privileges if it's attorney-client, and there's some other exceptions there. But the takeaway is to be safe and assume that things that you write down, and that includes things that you label confidential and things that you receive, could be made public. So just some hypos here. A member of the public sends an email to all board members to tell them that she would like to see new wildfire public education program. One member replies all and agrees. Is this a Brown Act violation? So here, not yet, because we only have one board member seeking to discuss and build support for this position. If enough members reply all, of course, will lead into a violation here. So again, the warning against using reply all. The other hypothetical is 5 members of a committee seek to meet with a staff member before a public meeting just to get some background information, get up to speed on a particular project. They don't make any decision. Is this a violation? So here, yes, the Brown Act meeting isn't limited to things meetings where decisions are made, but applies again to discussion and deliberation and this collective acquisition of facts. So this would be a covered meeting. There is one minor exception I wanted to note. I don't think this applies to you, but that during the pandemic, executive order allows a board to simultaneously receive briefings and facts about pandemic-related issues. So that's temporary and probably doesn't apply to you that much, very much. So best practices, I think I've mentioned this before. Again, assume under the Public Records Act, which is related, I think, in a policy way to the Brown Act, assume that writings aren't confidential. They could be disclosed. Avoid sending those emails and texts to the whole legislative body. If you have to do it, just provide information, facts only, don't solicit a response. Be careful not to use those reply alls, and think before you send that email or text. So here, agenda requirements. You do not have to worry very much about posting the agenda. The staff does that for you, and I've included it here just for informational purposes only. The agency agendas must be posted at a physical location and on the agency website. They must be mailed upon request. There's different time limits, of course, at different meetings. The regular meeting has a 72-hour window notice, special meetings 24 hours, and emergency meetings in certain circumstances, if they're declared, don't require that 24-hour notice at all. So under the Brown Act, it requires substantial compliance with these posting requirements. So for example, if posting on an agency board website encounters a glitch for some reason and it's unposted, so long as that is corrected within a reasonable amount of time, and there's other ways, for example, that people got notice of the agenda, like it was posted at a physical location, that should be fine. But again, if there's any doubt, the safest course of action is always to renotice. So if an item is not on the agenda, there's some limitations to what the board can do. Let's see, here we have the emergency situation when that I just talked about, and this happens fairly rarely. This is when 2/3 of the members present determine that there's a need for immediate action. And things that aren't covered in emergency are, for example, if you just forgot to put something on the agenda, of course. The thing that comes up most frequently is that public officials are, this last bullet point, they may briefly respond to comments and questions from the public and provide reference to staff and direct staff to place items on a future agenda. I think the important thing there is to make sure that those comments are brief. I know that there was a situation, I'm trying to remember the city, I think it was in Nevada, where they got into a bit of a pickle where briefly responding to comments turned into a bigger discussion, and that bigger discussion, members of the public had some difficulty with that, as it kind of turned into something that wasn't agendized but yet was discussed. So another hypo here, during public comment, a member of the public asks the agency board to consider increasing spending to support vegetation management. An agency member agrees and would like to briefly discuss this issue just to get a head start that will be held at a future meeting. Is this permissible? So you can probably tell how I worded that likely no. Officials may make brief announcement, ask clarifying questions of staff, and briefly report on his or her own activities, but discussion on an item may really only occur on items that are agendized. So the board may decide in this case that they want to place that item on a future agenda. I also, again, want to urge caution about being careful with brief comments or questions that have comments kind of embedded into them, because they, if oftentimes public members of the public can have the impression that there's a discussion going on about something that's not on the agenda that should have been, and they didn't receive notice. So that can be something that's easily avoidable. And of course, you can direct staff to put something on a future agenda. So a very important thing, as you can imagine, as you know, about the Brown Act is allowing public participation. Meetings must be open to the public and allow for this public participation. The current executive order allows remote Zoom meetings. There's pending legislation that would continue this indefinitely. There's some issues with that because they are, in this legislation, wanting to include language translation services with it. So I'm not sure where it stands as of this point, but it looks like it will go forward in some form. The member of the public may speak during the open forum, and this, of course, is the open forum before any items are considered that are on the agenda. And the members of the public are entitled, of course, to speak on any item on the agenda. So I'll briefly go through this. I don't think that this is very applicable to you. There are certain situations where meetings aren't public, and these are closed sessions, and they are limited by statute. There's some safe harbor exceptions which allow a legislative body to meet in closed doors regarding, for example, pending litigation, threatened litigation, real estate negotiations, employment performance reviews, or labor negotiations. Here again about closed sessions, the attendees are limited only to that legislative body and council or management support staff that needs to be there, And any items that are received in closed session are confidential. So attendees are prohibited from disclosing that confidential information that's acquired unless the whole body votes to disclose that information. So Brown Act enforcement, Brown Act remedies, both civil and criminal misdemeanor penalties apply to the Brown Act violations. The most common is the civil action to invalidate these actions that are taken in violation, and or kind of an injunction to prevent future violations. And in some cases, the district attorney may investigate an alleged violation, particularly if it's kind of complaint-based. So the process is first for any interested party. This can be any member of the public. I've seen this happen by a fellow member of the legislative body. The first process is an issue of demand to cure, and this is before filing any court action, which gives the agency some time to fix what they got wrong. Essentially, if they made a decision to make it again in open session, there's certain exceptions that have to do with contracts. If not cured, that party can seek to invalidate that court action, and they may seek a civil action for past violations following a cease and desist letter. And these remedies may involve the agency voting to comply with the Brown Act or going through a Brown Act training. So the important teeth, I think, here is this last part, is that a successful plaintiff may be awarded attorney's fees and costs. Additionally, an important part for public bodies, particularly where we're lucky enough here to have active community members, is that the public perception and the press that goes along with even these issues. So criminal complaints are available under the Brown Act. This is very rare. I do have to say that there's never been, to my knowledge, a criminal conviction associated with the Brown Act violation, but it's hypothetically there. Here's a standard that has to be shown to meet that. And again, even when that alleged violation doesn't lead to litigation, it can lead to bad press and can delay the process. So these are all the reasons to exercise caution. If you've got any Brown Act concerns or questions, please contact us for clarification. Here are just a few, or just two. I think you're probably familiar with the first one if you read the IJ at all. First, a couple of Brown Act issues that there's been some allegation of Brown Act violations, none found yet. Of course, the first has to do, looks like these are both renaming issues, the schools. The first one is the Drake High School 1327. There's broad community allegations over the past year of Brown Act violations. There's been an issue, a notice to cure and correct regarding the decision to rename the high school without public input. So basically, I'm sure you've read the news articles that this, even if these Brown Act violations are found not to have happened, it did delay the process. The process is ongoing as we speak, and it looks like they won't have a name by the end of this year. The second one, this is from 2018 with the formerly known Dixie School District. One school trustee, so this is one of the board members, filed a complaint against the district that she sat on, and she alleged violations of the Brown Act by discussing that name change during a closed session regarding that was labeled under performance evaluation. So it wasn't properly noticed. It wasn't the proper subject of a closed session item. So the basic lesson there is just to use caution. And of course, as is, I think I understand that it's important to you to invite the public and encourage transparency. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Do we have questions from the board? Lucy, please. Rebecca and then Stephen.
This is a very technical question, but I understand that I think there was a case where it was found that a public meeting could not require the public to sign in to identify themselves. Sorry, and now I'm wondering how that applies in the Zoom context where we do sign in with our ID.
That's very interesting. So yes, I had that in my notes. I didn't go through that, but right, under the Brown Act, you cannot require someone to identify themselves. It's often requested, I think, at standard form, in the days of real media, in-person meetings, when they got to the dais, please state your name, your address. Folks mostly comply, but there's no requirement that they can do that. I've seen in meetings that I've attended, you can switch your Zoom name. So I've seen like a letter K, I think that was one. So I think that that's the workaround with respect to keeping folks anonymous in that case. They do have to have some technological savvy because you have to know how to change your name, which I just figured out like 3 months after I started using Zoom. I had to have my kid do it, but I think that's a good point.
Thank you, Emily. Rebecca, please.
If you find yourself in a meeting where you have slipped into a Brown Act violation, you catch yourself, you stop it, you don't go any further. Is there some obligation to say to the broader board, we slipped into a Brown Act violation? We're just letting you know. Or you just let it go and
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Under the law, there's no obligation legally that I'm aware of at this point that you have to state your alleged violation. For one thing, they're fact specific. A lot of these things are gray. A lot of these things involve, slippery slope issues. So I'm not aware of any legal obligation that you have to do it. If it's something that the public is concerned about, I have seen situations where maybe at a following meeting, something was mentioned publicly saying, we understand this happened, so here's what we're doing to fix that. We are having another meeting to reconsider the subject. So I'm thinking of a particular subcommittee meeting that happened where they closed the agenda item, took a vote, and then continued to speak about the issue after everyone had left. So obviously, you have to allow the public to comment on the agenda item before you vote. So that was a violation of the Brown Act. Members of the press politely alerted that subcommittee of what had happened, and the better course was just to say, all right, we'll fix that. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. So that was a case where it was pretty clear cut. And that involved members of the public not being able to give input. So I think that there was some perceived harm there because the vote was taken and then they talked about it some more and it got a little wiggly. So I think that's not a yes or no answer to your question, but it would depend on the facts, I think.
thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Stephen, please, and you're on mute. There we go.
Yeah, okay, a couple of things. One is that I understand that the Brown Act applies only to us as far as the COC is concerned. If we're talking to a reporter, a friend, or anybody on the outside, it doesn't apply to them. So what that means is that if somebody has talked to a majority of us and then comes, say, to me and starts telling me what the other people said, I'm responsible for stopping the conversation and say, no, I can't talk. I can't hear what you're telling me about the other people.
Yes, that feels unnatural and awkward. It really does. And I think that you get used to that situation, or public officials I know. I'm sure there's a lot of you on here who've been in public office for a long time. But it just becomes kind of automatic that if you're at a community meeting, or if you're talking to a reporter, if you're talking to a constituent advocate who is really involved, just start that conversation with, I don't want to hear it. So it's awkward and unnatural because humans like to speak and know what each other's thinking. But, that's how it works. And
okay, so I've got another question. We're a pretty political bunch of people here in Marin. And a lot of social gatherings tend to bring up interesting subjects and viewpoints. Some of them heated. And many of us are known to be involved in something related to wildfire, whether it's a Firewise community or MWPA or the CWC. So if we go to a social gathering, or we even just having coffee on the corner here in Fairfax, and people come by and a conversation starts. Most of it is the public, not constrained at all by the Brown Act. What do? Can we just sit there as long as we're silent and say, look, I'm part of the committee and I can't say anything, but I'm interested in what you all have to say. Does that work?
Yeah, yes, obviously. And I think you come across the distinction that public officials are often in the position and encouraged to hear objectively information from the public, because those are the constituents that you're serving. So I don't want to give you the impression that you can't hear information from members of the public, members of the community. The important thing is that if there's a majority, or if you think that your viewpoint on a subject can be passed on, that's where you get into that gray area. But no, you are active members of the community. You're part of this group, and part of your responsibility is to know what the public's thinking. The difficulty and the unnatural part is to hear it, to take it in, and use caution with respect to the serial meetings to offer your opinion on anything.
But you can give factual information.
Yes.
The law says this, or the Brown Act says this, or your representative here in Fairfax is so-and-so.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Max, you have your hand raised, please.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, for that great presentation. Just a question. We oftentimes have ad hoc committees on the Oversight Committee. We've had, I think, 3 so far in our brief tenure here. And the way that we've been communicating is via staff, via Mark. Are there any limitations for people not on an ad hoc committee share information with the ad hoc committee, because that additional person will form a majority? So for example, if you have an ad hoc committee focused on, I don't know, some issue, right? Developing some policy around something, and it's made up of a minority of the overall committee, but it's just shy of 1 person. Are there any limitations on the additional committee members sending that subcommittee information via Mark?
Right. My understanding is that the sending it to Mark is the crucial point. So there shouldn't be a situation where you're sending information directly. Seems a little distinction without a difference. But Mark might be able to send that anonymously to the members of the subcommittee, just to make sure that there's no, direct communication between the members of the ad hoc subcommittee and another one that would really amount to a quorum. So I don't see any issues that I can think of right now with going through an intermediary, especially if it's with respect to factual, issues.
So I think where this maybe would come into a gray area, and this is kind of where I'm getting at, right, is when it has to do with someone's opinion, right? Like, hey, can you convey to the subcommittee my opinion on this thing I know they're going to consider coming up at their meeting on such and such date, right? Should that be anonymous? Can that have that, or is the real concern kind of a back and forth, right?
Yeah, I would stay clear of Mark or anyone else expressing opinion, because what the Brown Act is prohibiting is discussion, deliberation, or consideration of any issue. And I think once you start opining on things, that bleeds over into you're deliberating on something, and you're adding your voice to that deliberation. And so I would stay clear of that opinion giving.
Okay. What about if we so tonight? I'm not sure if you just hopped on at the end, or if you caught the end of our discussion. We were talking about a code of conduct for ourselves as a body. And we have a subcommittee. And our subcommittee is going to be meeting at some point between now and the next meeting. A non-subcommittee member made some great suggestions and offered to send those suggestions, that actual wording, to our subcommittee via Mark. Is that allowed? Because that's what everyone on the COC would like to happen, right? But I'm just making sure that something like that isn't in violation.
Right. So here, let me get this straight. So you have an ad hoc subcommittee that's considering, you have a temporary ad hoc private subcommittee that's considering this language, and you're having input based on that language from members of you.
From someone else not on the ad hoc committee.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So the safest thing to do is to make that ad hoc committee public, obviously, because what I can see happening is that there's some discussion and deliberation among the substance. So the purpose of that ad hoc committee is this certain thing, this decision, this recommendation that will happen. And when you add folks on that aren't in there, whether it's, through this format or another one, that's a little bit troublesome to me. What could happen? I'm trying to think of a way that you could do this.
Oh, Emily, if I can
Yeah.
offer this, that the input has been offered during a public meeting when the ad hoc committee did their work,
Yes.
brought it to a public meeting of the full committee, deliberated on it,
Right.
recommendations were made, and then that's when the committee member that was not part of the ad hoc is going to forward it through me, and then it'll be deliberated again at another public meeting. This was the input that so-and-so added to this, and we incorporated it here during the ad hoc.
Right. Right.
Pass the test?
I think that that's a good distinction, is that it was agendized for your purposes to discuss this for you. And so I think that that does sound appropriate. So yes, that's what I would.
Had that interaction occurred before an agendized public meeting, then it would have been a violation.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the exact comment I was going to ask. I was going to ask to the nuance in this is that we've discussed it in the public already. So there's no surprise coming into us. We know what to expect.
But let's say an additional member came up with a great suggestion that they did not offer during the agendized meeting. Would that be okay, or would that not be? And I don't have any agenda in these questions. I'm just purely asking for my own and everyone else's benefit.
Yeah, I hear you. That does give me pause, because that's not been discussed during that open meeting. So what I see happening there is that you're having discussions outside of the open meeting where you've got that ad hoc committee and then some people adding in some substance later. So I always find it safer to, how oftentimes this works is the ad hoc subcommittee develops a policy, for example. It goes to the full body discusses it, adds some things, and then makes their recommendation, sends it back down for the subcommittee to consider. So it's that back and forth. But when you look at it as a larger body, I would want that discussion and that suggestions to be in that open meeting. Just to ensure the public have a chance to know what's happening, and that information is out there being transparent.
That's really
great.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Stephen, please.
Yeah, the only trouble with that is that our committee meetings become wordsmithing exercises. And that's what we were getting tied up in. And the ideal is we had a suggestion and somebody said, sure, what I'll do is I'll put it in writing and send it to you. But no decision is going to be made until it comes back to this whole open committee at its next meeting.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Number one, I hear what you're saying about frustration about wordsmith, because public agencies adopt admin policies and ordinances, and it can get really, as you know, who have spent time in this, really, really nitpicky. I think that as long as the substance of what you're recommending back to that subcommittee is discussed, and there's nothing like new coming in that wasn't discussed, then you're fine. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a way to avoid that lengthy process of wordsmithing, because I know you're all thoughtful folks, and people who serve in the public are thoughtful, and they want to make sure every word is appropriate.
Would you recommend that such things as this ad hoc subcommittee have a public meeting where they discuss this thing?
Well, that's kind of a policy choice. I've seen it go both ways. I have been involved in subcommittees that started out, for example, as ad hoc, subcommittees that weren't subject to the Brown Act, and then it became clear, for one thing, that it was kind of an ongoing thing, and it wasn't that temporary, and it kept on going. So that's a different issue. And then for policy reasons, if it's decided that maybe it would be more transparent. So that's kind of a policy choice that I would have to be considered as at your level as policymakers.
Great, thank you, Emily. I do have a question. The goat with his cell phone, Who was the goat talking to and what were they discussing is what I want.
I think the goat was talking to the press, or the dog was talking to the press.
Oh, was that a dog? I thought it was a goat.
Oh, the goat on the cell phone.
Yes, the goat on the cell phone.
Of course.
Well, they were participating in Zoom by voice, you know, come on.
Okay, I gotcha. All right. Well, is there any more questions at this point? We're drawing to a close here. Okay, well, thank you so much, Emily. Larry, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just a question that I never got clarified in a number of other discussions like this, because I think they haven't really decided yet. You know, I have always had a laptop at the dais, and they tell me that, you know, you're not supposed to do that because you have information that nobody else, your colleagues or the public has. And it needs to be disclosed. I mean, what did they ever make a determination on that? Because they even had a big discussion about this at the MCCMC meetings.
Yeah, I remember that was a big deal a couple of years ago, right? Yeah, a couple of years ago. So I am not aware of any formal ruling or, you know, Attorney General opinion that came up about that issue. I think where it was left is that people have to, you have to be trustworthy. You know, you are barred from looking at outside information if it's especially a quasi judicial hearing that the public doesn't have. So I think it's just the honor system at this point is what I'm aware of. The thing that I had noticed happening, or I've heard of happening, and I think I mentioned this before, is folks texting the majority of the members saying, well, what the heck are you going to do on this? And that can be embarrassing. I think that happened in a city that they got caught at. So that's a little different issue than your information question. I don't think laptops at a meeting are prohibited. At some jurisdictions, they have a, you know, agency issued one. I'm not aware of anything prohibiting it flat out.
Okay, thanks. Just curious.
I remember that that discussion though. Yeah.
It never got resolved.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. I can't speak for everyone, but I found it very helpful. I think everyone else did as well. Really appreciate your time this evening.
Well, thank you so much for you know, having me. And of course, if you have any questions, these are always best dealt with ahead of time. And we're here to help. And so please reach out.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, we will close that item and open to item 9, which are future agenda items. And I believe we do have some. Who would like to start? Larry, please.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be May, but probably at the latest June. It's a follow-on to, you know, the audit process. And I think a discussion that we probably need, rather than to make it a serial discussion where we wait till the audit, is that if we have a general sense of what it is that we'd like to see and what type of presentation that we'd like to see, format that we'd like to see it in. So for example, you've seen the financial statements that, you know, are currently used in the meetings, but, you know, is that providing you with the type of information you would like to see to feel like you've done your job as an oversight committee? And frequently where I've always gotten in the big debate with the auditors is that they always follow the format that, you know, is their specific way to present the audit. But a lot of times you might want to see information that is rolled up into the numbers that you see. And a good example is that you've seen in the budget, for example, there are line items for each specific program. But what if you wanted to look at whether the money was being spent programmatically or for administration? So then you would have a different, let's just say, presentation of that.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you wanted to look at compensation, the question might be, you know, how much are you spending on post-employment benefits? Well, that number is not in that audit presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's just an example, but it's to get us thinking about, you know, what do we need in order for us to do our job.
Very good. Okay, and then Stephen and Rebecca.
Yeah, I'd like us to discuss the financial reports and the details. When I'm looking at them, I notice a fair amount of jargon that if you deal with financial reports a lot, you might either you already understand them or you can figure them out. But I imagine that there are a fair number of people in the public who would simply say, I don't understand what this is all about. So that's one, and I'd like to maybe have us discuss what sorts of things we want to know about, the information that we want the reports to give us. And the second is a discussion of the software that the MWPA is either using or planning on using to keep track of where all of the budget items and expenditures and things are stored, so that maybe, Larry, if we ask a question that isn't normally in a report, it can be searched and found.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Did I see another hand? Rebecca, sorry. Yes, that's right.
I'd like a similar kind of discussion, or I don't know if it's training or just discussion with Mark about how the work plans are going to look, and can we separate them by a core, DSpace, and local, and how should we be looking at each category? So sort of like the audit reports or budgets, which things are going to be important for us to highlight about work plans? What are we most concerned about? And then where are we going to find that information? How can we quickly look at whether projects are adhering to the rules and regulations, and should we be concerned about this or that or nothing?
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. And if I might suggest maybe interfacing directly with Mark with how you would like the agenda item to read, so that it isn't a lot of back and forth and he's presenting it as you would like it to be presented. If that would be help to you, Mark.
Yeah, and yeah, I'll connect with Rebecca on it, but I think I'm getting the gist of what she's saying.
Very good, very good. Are there any more comments at this point? Carolyn, I'm so sorry we've gone over, but, Pat, please.
This isn't exactly an agenda item, but as others were talking about, looking at all kinds of things, I think it would be great. This would be a field trip, but it would be nice sometime to actually see what's being done. Not that we distrust, but I would like to see a shaded fuel break. And I don't know what else, but to, I'd like to see a cleared evacuation route, just so that we have an idea in the real world what all of this money is being spent for. So it's not just on paper, but in reality.
So it could be an agenda item as a future field trip discussion, if everyone's comfortable with that, and we can start to formalize that at some point. Maybe too early, but at some point it would make a lot of sense. Max, please.
Yeah, just a suggestion of something that I think would probably be pretty easy for Mark to pull together, would just be a very simple slideshow with a couple of photos of that, right? One image, shaded fuel break, another of an evacuation, clearing, et cetera, right? But I think a field trip would be a great idea. The tricky part is just there aren't the projects of the MWPA, right? So we're looking kind of at other projects at this point, right?
But in the future, we would have some.
And we could even make that a field trip, but that the COC kind of coordinates amongst ourselves, right? I mean, we could we could do something to go look at the projects of the previous year, et cetera. Yeah.
As long as we're not in violation of the Brown Act.
Right.
Well, we're allowed to go and see things. We can make it an official meeting too.
We'll just have the members of the public in tow with us.
Yeah.
All of them, yeah.
Bruce Purcell will come along with us.
There you
That's
go.
more education, right?
Okay, very good. Are there any more comments at this point? Okay, so we're on to item 10, which is a motion to adjourn. Would someone like to make that motion? Stephen, thank you. Do we
And
have a
second,
Pat was quick. Beat you, Kingston. Okay, with that, everyone, thank you. Really good meeting this evening.
Hey, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah,
Good night.
have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.